the webinar. Important, first, thank you very much for joining the webinar, especially during your lunch break. I encourage you to ask all your questions in the chat box. We will try to answer the question during the session. And if we don't have the time, we will tackle all the questions after the session. So, welcome to this second webinar organized by Digit89. My name is Mathieu Wemar. I'm the COO of Digit89. We launched this series of webinars to tackle different topics linked to Digit89, the cash flow management, the client-supplier relationship, the working capital optimization, the sustainable finance, and so on. During the previous webinar, we were really happy because we count around 200 live participants and many other reactions following the webinar. During the first webinar, we tackled one of the most important challenges faced by companies, which is the optimization of their short-term treasury. We also highlight the fact that it's a really important issue for the whole economy, as 1/3 of the bankruptcies are linked to a lack of treasury. The key takeaways of this first webinar was that there is a quick conflicting goal between a buyer and its supplier, because the buyer will try to pay as late as possible, and the supplier would like to be paid earlier to finance its operation. We also saw that when the buyer is a strong company, they tend to have longer payment terms, and it affects the whole supply chain because the supplier are weakened by those long payment terms and sometimes late payments. So after addressing during the previous webinar the basic solution offered by a bank, the more classical one, like factoring, straight loan, we would like to tackle during this session a new emerging model, which is the collaborative reverse factoring. So first, maybe I don't know if you are familiar with this model, so don't hesitate to interact in the chat box to tell me if you already heard about this model or not. Just to introduce it, this model, it enables the companies to optimize their working capital, but in a sustainable way, because it will allow the companies to optimize its working capital, but without weakening their supplier, because the supplier will also have access to cash earlier, so they will also be stronger and more innovative and so on. So it's really a win-win situation. So this was really a quick introduction. So maybe I would like to start about the factoring. I always like to explain what is reverse factoring by starting from the factoring, even it's totally different. So we always start in this situation. We have supplier that send their goods, their services to their clients, so the buyer, and they also send the invoice in order to be paid at maturity date, so after 60 days or other terms. And then at invoice due date, they expect to receive the payment of their clients. In factoring, the initiative starts from the supplier. So it's the supplier who would like to have an early payment of their invoice. They will contact a third party named the factor, and they will ask to this third party to pay anticipately their sales invoice. So the factor will analyze the situation of the supplier. The factor will analyze the invoice portfolio of this supplier, and the factor will also analyze the client of this supplier. And if the factor agree, the factor will pay earlier the supplier, and then the factor will collect the money from the different clients of this supplier. In reverse factoring, it's really different because the initiative starts from the buyer, and this is really important. because the buyer will contact a third party in order to authorize him to pay earlier the invoice of their supplier. So how the process is working, it always starts from the buyer. The buyer collaborates with the third party. And when the buyer received the invoice from their supplier, they will communicate all the data related to this invoice to the third party. Then the factor will be able to pay anticipately all the supplier of the buyer. So we are not talking about one relationship between the factor and the supplier, but it's all the supplier from this buyer. And then at maturity date, the factor will receive the money from the buyer. So the most important difference of this model comparing to factoring is the fact that it's initiated by the buyer. So the factor will need to collect the money from a buyer who has been chosen by the factor, and the factor knows this buyer. So the relationship is different. With reverse factoring, there is also a lower risk of fraud or invoice dispute, because in factoring, supplier could tend to send fake invoice or to send invoice that will be refused by the buyer. But in reverse factoring, the data related to the invoice come from the buyer itself. So there is a lower risk that at the end, the buyer said to the factor, okay, I refuse this invoice, I didn't approve this invoice, because the information come from himself. Another interesting point from the reverse factoring is the fact that it's a mass model. So when a buyer adopts this model, the factor will be able to finance the invoice of all their suppliers. So it can represent really high volumes with clearly high potential economies of scales. And the last point, which for me is one of the most important one, is the fact that in this model of reverse factoring, the cost is only based on the buyer creditworthiness. So the supplier situation or the supplier size doesn't impact the model. It's only based on the good financing condition of the buyer. So this model has really an objective to create a win-win situation in the buyer supplier relationship, because the buyer will be able to maintain its long payment terms, and the supplier will have an option to be paid earlier, and they will benefit from the good financing condition of their clients. So this is really the win-win model bring by the reverse factoring. A question that can be raised is why reverse factoring is emerging only now in Belgium and not before. One of the first elements is the fact that in Belgium, the market is mainly represented by factoring companies. And those companies can charge higher fee with factoring than they would in reverse factoring. And so clearly they don't have really an interest to launch this kind of model. Another reason is the fact that the classical model of reverse factoring, often offered by the bank, had some issue. The first issue was that it was quite costly to implement. It was an investment for the buyer to put in place this kind of model. So at the end, it was only reserved to really big buyers, so the multinationals. Another bad point of the classical model of reverse factoring is the fact that it was time consuming to onboard all the supplier to access this solution. So at the end, the solution was limited to the most strategic supplier, so the top biggest supplier, and not to the mass of supplier who are represented by the SMEs. So the model was really for the biggest supplier. And the last point with the classical model is that it was not really flexible. If a supplier wanted to benefit from this model, they needed to finance all their invoice. They didn't have the choice of the invoice that they want to be paid earlier or not. So it's a all or nothing. But last few years, we can see that there is clearly a growth of this reverse factoring market. Especially it's planned like a 40% growth for the coming years. And there are two main reasons. The first is that companies are seeking for alternative financing solution. It's today the banks are less willing to grant credit to the companies. It's more and more difficult to find financing solution. So the companies are looking for other option. And the main reason of the growth of reverse factoring is thanks to the technology. When I talk about technology, I talk about e-invoicing, I talk about the digital platform, the digitalization, and so on. The technology really unlocked the full potential of this reverse factoring model because firstly now to implement reverse factoring is really easy for the buyer. It can be implemented for free. It's really a plug and play model. So a lot of companies can implement today the reverse factoring, not only the multinationals. Another good point of the technology is that thanks to the digitalization, there is no huge potential for automatization. Reverse factoring model is clearly a mass model, and there is huge room for automatization that could clearly reduce the cost that the supplier will pay for the services. And the last point is the creation of a digital platform that manage the reverse factoring, and it creates a new model of reverse factoring, and this model is called the collaborative reverse factoring. It's named collaborative because now, today, the supplier are not forced anymore to finance all their invoice or nothing. They have the choice, they have the power to decide if they want to be paid earlier and which invoice they want to be paid earlier. So it's really a model on demand. So much more flexible for the supplier. So all those reasons bring today the reverse factoring in a more societal model than before, and much more interesting for all the parties, the buyer and the supplier. Don't hesitate to interact in the chat, to ask your question, to share your truth. I will answer it during this session. So I would like to come back to this win-win situation. So we have the two parties, the suppliers and the buyer. Clearly, the reason for the suppliers to adopt this kind of model, it's quite obvious. It's accessible to all the supplier. So because it's based on the creditworthiness of the buyer, the solution is for all the suppliers, no matter their size, their financial condition, they all have access to an affordable source of cash. The second good point for the supplier, it's that it's really a flexible tool, because nothing changed for them. They still send their invoice directly to their clients. The process are the same. There is no commitment from the supplier. The only thing is that they have this tool in their hand, and if they have a need of treasury, they can ask for early payments. It can be really recurrent in order to optimize their working capital, or it can be occasional in case of trouble or in case of specific time, if they need a specific amount of cash. Another important point for the supplier is that it's affordable source of cash. There is three main reasons. First is based on the good financing condition of their clients. Second, it's clearly a model where there can be economies of scales. And the third reason is the fact that all the data regarding the invoice come from the buyer. So there is a lower risk for the factor, and then a lower cost for the supplier. And the last point is really an important one, because due to the collaboration upstream with the buyer and the factor, the supplier can benefit from non-recourse early payment. So it means that when the factor pay earlier an invoice to the supplier is not concerned anymore if the buyer doesn't pay or pay later, he's totally freed from the risk of credits or the risk of late payments. So this is really the reason why supplier would like to benefit from this kind of solution. I would also like to explain the reason why buyer adopt this kind of model, and this is really important to discuss it because everything starts from the buyer. The first point is that now, thanks to the new digital solution, it's free for the buyer to launch a reverse factoring program, and it has no balance sheet impact. So the funding linked to the model is not on the balance sheet of the buyer. We have also many buyers that adopt this kind of model simply because they believe in this societal model and they just want to do this positive action toward the supplier that clearly improve the relationship they have with their supplier. But one of the main reasons to adopt this kind of model, it's to strengthen their supply chain. The buyer that adopt this kind of model really understand that a supply chain, even if it might seem linear, it's really a cycle. So it's important to understand that, yes, the buyer rely on the supplier to deliver goods. The supplier rely on the buyer to receive the money. But if the supplier is not unhealthy, or if the supplier have an issue, they will have issue in the supply chain, less quality goods, and so on. So how it strengthens the supply chain, it's simple. The buyer will be able to have long payment terms, and the supplier will have an affordable access to cash. And this cash will enable the suppliers to invest in development. They will be stronger, they will be more innovative, and it's really a comparative advantage for the whole supply chain. The last reason, and I already mentioned it, for the buyer to adopt this kind of model, it's at the end, it allows the buyer to maximize its payment terms, or at least maintain its actual payment terms, but this time without weakening their supplier, because their supplier have really an alternative in their hands where they can have their cash earlier if they want it. So those are the reason. I check if I don't have if I have any reaction. Don't hesitate to ask your question clearly. So I would like to talk about one of the main challenge of this model. I think it's clear. The model needs the upstream collaboration from the buyers. If there are no buyers adopting the model, there are no early payment possible for the supplier. This is clear. But an interesting point of this model is that it can clearly become systemic. I can give you, for example, a practical example. With Digit89, we are present in the healthcare sector. What is really interesting with the hospital is that they have many suppliers, and those suppliers represent the whole economy. We have the baker, we have the laundry, we have the pharma, so many kind of suppliers. And when an hospital adopts a reverse factoring program, all the suppliers have an affordable access to cash. But when a second hospital joined the model, the program become even more relevant, because yes, there are new suppliers that access this solution, but we have also all the suppliers in common between the two hospitals that already have access to the solution, but that will have more and more invoice accessible on the platform, and more a bigger volume to finance. So this is really the systemic model, and we can even go further, because among the supplier of this hospital, there are clearly also strong companies that can offer the program to their supplier, and so on. So we have a chain that can bring this systemic model. So practically, those are the key elements to implement a reverse factoring program. It always starts by the buyer, where the buyer needs to be eligible for the program. So there are a small analysis of the buyer, and if the credit rating of the buyer is sufficient, it can have an agreement between the factor and the buyer to launch the program. Then there is the implementation. As I said, the implementation today, it's a simple plug and play. So what's happened, it's simply a communication channel between the accounting system of the buyer and the platform. So every night, all the invoice data are communicated by the accounting system to the platform. And when the model is in place, the model can be launched. So it will always start with an announcement of the solution to announce at all the suppliers that they know have access to this solution and invite them to request their access to the platform. Generally, the access for the supplier is free, and they pay when they ask for early payments. So this really is the way reverse factoring is implemented. But for this point, I really encourage you to contact us if you need more information about the implementation process of this kind of model. We can show you a demo and explain all the steps in detail. So this was all for this subject. I would like to check if we have some question in the comments. I can see that it's quite there is no question at all. Okay, great. Feel free to ask your question in the comments after the webinar. We can still answer them after, so no problem. I really would like to thank you very much for participating to this second webinar. I can already invite you to the next one that will tackle a subject which is the sustainable finance. They will have a debate on the around this subject. Thank you very much.